I'd like to welcome you all to this afternoon's program. It is sponsored by Historic Classical. My name is Josephine Sarnelli, and I am the president of the Historic Classical Board. We have with us today our speaker, who's going to introduce herself. And this program started off as the anniversary of the 75th ending of World War II. But because of the pandemic, it turned into the 80th anniversary of the US entrance into World War II. And that will be commemorated on December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor Day. So this will be the 80th anniversary. And we have a series of programs that we are bringing to you. I will discuss those programs at the end. We are recording today's program, and it will be available on our YouTube station called Historic Classical. So with that, we're going to introduce you to Susan Ashman, and Susan's going to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am going to share my screen with you. Let's see from the beginning. There we go. I am a park ranger and the historic weapons supervisor at Springfield Armory National Historic Site. Hopefully you guys all know where that is. And today I'm just going to give you an overview of what it was like to work at the Springfield Armory during World War II, and they called those employees soldiers of production there. So, you know, to me, I always like to say a lot of people don't visit the Armory because they say they aren't really interested in firearms. But to me, Springfield Armory is more than just firearms. So the Springfield Armory manufactured small arms for the United States military for 174 years, from 1794 to 1968. And I'm sure you recognize, especially this gentleman on the right. So before the Revolutionary War, we were mainly importing firearms. The arsenal was established for the Continental Army in 1777. Ammunition was manufactured there, weapons repaired, army supplies were stockpiled, and artillery was maintained. This was all good, but you know, we were fighting for our independence during the Revolutionary War from Britain. And since we wanted to be independent, to be truly independent, George Washington wanted his own manufacturing site for firearms. You know, you can't always depend on those imports from foreign countries, especially when you're at war with one of those countries at some point. So from the recommendation of Henry Knox, who was Secretary of War from 1789 to 1794, Springfield was the site of our first national armory. And at this point, I always like to do programs in person because I love the interaction with the audience. So sometimes this is tough when I can't ask you guys questions. But did you know that Brookfield and Hartford were also considered for the location for our first national armory? I live next to Brookfield, and when I drive through Brookfield, I'm always like, why Brookfield? But I think that was more with politics and such. So why Springfield? So the town was located at the intersection of a colonial highway. The Connecticut River was close by, so it was far enough upstream to be safe from enemy attacks. Also, mills were located all along the river, so for some of the natural resources that was available. And also, supplies and a workforce were close at hand, which was really important. And Henry Knox said, describing the location where the Springfield Armory is located right on top of that hill there, he said the plain just above Springfield is perhaps one of the most proper spots on every account. So it's pretty neat that that is where they built the Springfield Armory. And also you think of how neat the location must have been when there was no trees and you could see directly to the Connecticut River at that time. So when Congress approved the founding of the Springfield Armory up north, he also authorized one down south. and that is Harper's Ferry in Virginia at that time, but it's now West Virginia. That was a state in 1863. But it wasn't our sister armory for very long, because when Virginia seceded from the Union on April 17th, 1861, it made Harper's Ferry a target due to the firearms and machinery there. So Lieutenant Rogers of the U.S. Armory, or of the U.S. Army, went to go guard the armory at that time. But the only problem is he had only about 50 regulars and 15 volunteers to guard that armory. And so he heard the Virginia militia was coming up, and they had 360 men that were advancing on Harper's Ferry at that time to capture some of those arms. So he knew that he was outnumbered. He didn't have reinforcements coming. So if you can't beat them, burn it. And that's what they did. So Jones and his men set fire to the Harper's Ferry Armory and its building to keep the weapons out of soon-to-be Confederate hands before retreating across the Potomac River. 15,000 firearms were destroyed in that fire. But then you think of the location of Harper's Ferry. It was there was a lot of Southern sympathizers at that time who actually worked at the armory here. They were able to put out that fire. They were still able to get some of those firearms and machinery, and they moved those down south to the Confederate armories, which were in Richmond and Fayetteville. 2 weeks later, Stonewall Jackson came in, and he just cleaned the place out and moved the rest of it. And it's interesting that they never rebuilt that armory. So Springfield Armory was the only national armory. So it was the only time it was run by the government, or I should say the U.S. Ordnance Department. And now it's all in private hands once we stopped manufacturing firearms in 1968. So that was just a little history how we got there. But the good news is you can still visit Harper's Ferry. It is kind of like one of our sister sites. There are 423 national park sites under the National Park Service. And Harper's Ferry, it is so beautiful to go see. It is at the confluence of the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers. And also it's the halfway point on the Appalachian Trail. And it's very picturesque. So now we're gonna fast forward about 80 years, and we're gonna talk about the armory during World War II. So when Hitler ordered the invasion of Poland in September of 1939, the armory's budget was increased by 250%. So they were ready for this, unlike a lot of people said we were not ready for World War I. So employment skyrocketed at this point. So the workforce was more diverse, with women coming on board. And women comprised about 20% of the workforce by June of 1942 and 43% just the following year. So between September and October of 1942, some 1,600 women were hired as the demand for weapons on the battlefield grew at that time. So when you look at this chart, you can see how employment peaked at just under 14,000 people in the spring of 1943, and it'd never be that high again. So I'm always very surprised at the diverse workforce who were working there. They were from all over the world. They were from China, Norway, Greece, Poland, Germany, Sweden. Just, it was a true melting pot at the armory. So the women who worked at the armory in manufacturing were called WOWs, Women Ordnance Workers, because they worked for the Army Ordnance Department. So we always like to say that Rosie the Riveter has nothing on the WOWs. You know, she's got what, red or white polka dots on her bandana. And if you look real closely at ours, they look like bombs. But actually it's an iron hand grenade with a powder charge and a fuse on it. That had to be lit before throwing it. And so the use of this, the shell and flame by the Ordnance Department, it dates back to 1832, which is pretty surprising. So I always say I'd love to do a program, you know, called the Battles of the Bandana, about Rosie versus the WOWs. And I think I was always trying to find out when these bandanas came out, and they basically came out around the same time. And from an advertisement in the July-August 1943 issue of Army Ordnance, it's a magazine, it said, and she wears the WOW bandana. It's water repellent, washable, dustproof, and the WOW bandana, designed in accordance with the U.S. Army specification, is an attractive, safe, and unifying head covering to identify women ordnance workers. And every woman in your plant will want one. So if you do want one, you can buy one in our gift shop. We do have those available. So two of the women who, these are just very few who work there. Many of the women who did work at the Springfield Armory took on the manufacturing roles once previously held by men at that time. And they saw working at the Armory as their patriotic duty in order to help the boys overseas win the war at that time. And what is pretty unique is the Armory also attempted to pair the specific women up with the specific jobs according to their natural physical abilities. So this is Flo Johnson in her frilly apron there. And she worked at the Armory from 1942 to 1945. She started out as a mechanical learner, but then was promoted to a assembler of the M1 rifle. And she was also the first woman to get the certificate of merit. And that was in April of 1942. So it was soon after she worked there, but I do like her frilly apron. And then you have poor Mary Smith there working on the forge. And as I was talking previously about how they would try to pair your specific job with your natural physical ability, I'm curious on why Mary Smith, her natural ability was working in the forge. So I'm very curious on how she got there. So also when you would apply for a job at the Armory, you were given an aptitude test to see how you would fare in a particular job category within the Armory. And again, it's really interesting how much thought went into what job you would have at the Armory through these tests and such. So they were initially surprised at how few women applied at the Armory initially, and management did go knocking on doors to find out the reasoning behind this. And they found out that it was childcare. Childcare was an issue because some of their men were working or they were overseas. So the Armory actually opened up a childcare facility at the High School of Commerce across the street to help the women there. And then after that, when word got out, the numbers went up. It never went higher than 42% of women working at the Armory. Many men had deferments to stay at the Armory and work there. And so it never went up higher than that at that time. So what were we manufacturing at the Armory? It was the M1 Garand rifle. And this was designed by John Garand or Garand, depending on where you're from. And he was born in Quebec. He was one of 12 children and moved with his family to Jewett City, Connecticut. He learned the machinist trade in the textile mills down there. And he worked in precision tool factories in Providence, Rhode Island at that time, and also New York City. And during World War I, he designed a lightweight, fully automatic machine rifle, but it was rejected by the US Army at that time. But not everything was rejected, because he actually got hired by the Springfield Armory at that time. And in 1936, after 17 years of working on this design under military specifications, the M1 was accepted as the standard shoulder arm of the United States Army, and 4 years later by the US Marine Corps. And George Patton said that he considers the M1 the greatest battle implement ever devised at that time. So production of the M1 peaked in January of 1944 with 122,001 manufactured in that month alone. So a rough translation of that is about 3,936 rifles per day or 164 rifles per hour. So Springfield Armory produced 3,526,922 M1 rifles from 1932 to 1945. And at no time were we manufacturing firearms ourselves. So it wasn't just Springfield Armory. From the first flintlock in 1795 all the way to the M14, we always had private manufacturers working with us throughout that time there. So overall, there was about 6 million M1s manufactured, besides our 3 million, a combined effort with those private manufacturers. So these soldiers of productions, the employees were called, worked around the clock during World War II, 6 to 7 days a week. Occasionally, the shops at the Armory were ordered to work 7 days a week for 2 weeks straight. And then the third Sunday was reserved for like a general equipment maintenance. And third shift wasn't discontinued until 1944. So employees did work all holidays, including New Year's Day. You earned an extra day pay. That was very nice. And Thanksgiving. And on Thanksgiving Day in 1942, employees were permitted to have a 30-minute lunch instead of the normal 20-minute lunch. So you got 10 minutes extra to eat that turkey. And I know we've all probably had to work a holiday sometime, which I always found very, very rough, you know, when you know all your families together, but you still had to work, and they did as well. So at this time, I want to read an excerpt. It's called Soldiers of Production. And an employee wrote this named R.J. Alden. And he wrote this for the Armor newsletter, which I'll talk about in just a few minutes, in January of 1942, just so you can get a feel of the morale at that time at the Springfield Armory. So we dedicate the work of our hands to our soldiers and sailors and all people throughout the world who want to live in peace and freedom. Our thousands of whirring machines stamp, cut, grind the parts that make the finest weapons of the world. As each workman senses his individual responsibility, our production rises and rises. Our fighting forces must have guns, tanks, ships, and planes. We will give them these weapons, shining, fine, accurate, made with our strength, our hands, our hearts, and our souls. This is our solemn and holy promise to the soldiers who are fighting for us and the country which we love. We are soldiers of production in the shops and the offices. We will keep the wheels turning night and day to produce the weapons needed for the defense of our nation and the perpetuation of our ideas. We pledge this. And this is the pledge of every true American. In the long days ahead, you can remember the promise, America, and remembering it, take courage, for at the end of the road is victory for democracy, final and complete. They also had cafeterias. They had at least 3 of them here. And they wanted that, so they wanted their employees to get hot meals and they wouldn't have to leave the Armory grounds. I like this Peach Sunday one for 15 cents. And just for any of you who were not aware of it, the Armory was about 90 acres and there was 3 campuses. There was the historic hill shops where the Springfield Museum is and Springfield Technical Community College. Across the street was called Federal Square. That was started in 1890 for the production of the Krag Jorgensen rifle. And then 3/4 of a mile south of the Armory was the water shops. And they called that the heartbeat of the Armory. So it was almost like its own little city there. And so again, they didn't really like the employees leaving there and then having to come back. So that's why they would provide just about everything they needed at work there. So they also had blackout and air raid drills. Those were practiced regularly. And in the Army Navy E Award was presented to companies during World War II whose production achieved excellence in production. And by war's end, that award had been earned by only 5% of the more than 85,000 companies that were involved in producing materials for the war effort. And it was pretty neat that the Springfield Armory got this award twice. And in our collection, we have a flag with the E on it, which is pretty impressive. And this was an employee badge, and they also got an E for that award on their name tags too, which is pretty neat. So the Armory newsletter was published in-house each month during wartime by employees. And this was to increase morale. And the newsletter was a hoot. It is quite entertaining to read. We do have copies of it in our archives. And employees from different departments were encouraged to submit news for this newsletter about wartime production, about birth announcements. They'd have poetry, clubs, sports teams, news from the front line, from former employees, jokes, cartoons, etc. In no way could this Armory newsletter be published today or reprinted, at least probably without a lawsuit in hand. It was sexist. It was very not politically correct at all. I have some examples of what's in there. These are some of these cartoons here. And again, this was all done by the employees and published in-house. Dr. Seuss too. I don't know how many of you know about, we have a book called Dr. Seuss Goes to War, and he did a lot of cartoons about the war. And here we have this bottom, if you can't read it, it says, "A woman's place is in the pants or plants there." So the management wanted to keep morale up. This was really important to them. Happy employees, they felt, meant higher production at that time. And so they would have lunchtime concerts on a regular basis. And this was part of the Federal Music Project, which was part of the WPA, the Works Project Administration. This was from 1938 to about 1943. But it was unfortunately phased out in 1943. This was over across the street from the Armory as well. So it was not all work and no play at the Armory. Another morale booster was clubs and teams. And there were many clubs and sports teams. You name it, they had it: bowling, tennis, golf, hockey, baseball, rowing, archery, intramural basketball, and more. And they had a club for bridge and lunch. Lunch club was always my favorite one. Swing band, defense bonds, the Red Cross, etc. And it was really funny because in the Armory newsletter, this is where I got so much of the information of what it was like to work at the Armory. A lot of the teams would challenge the other teams in different shops. So this one team was called the Five Bachelors, and that was the name of their team. From the water shops, extend a challenge to any bachelor girls teams from the hill shops to participate in a bowling match. And stakes will be the match and supper to follow. So editors at the Armory News responded, "While the Armory News is printing this item as received, it absolves itself of all responsibility should any romance develop." So I can't even begin to tell you how many romances and marriages did come out of the Springfield Armory. So one of my favorite things that I read about was the On to Victory dance. And this was in February of 1943. It was held until 3 a.m. so that all shifts could attend. And I'm not sure how many of you are familiar or have heard the name. I do love big band music, but I never heard of Judy Kane. She was the band leader that evening. You can see her in her white gown there. And so this is a time too when the WOW bandanas were given out to the employees, and then employees were also asked to sign a victory pledge. Now, I don't know how many of you recognize where this was, but this was actually at Springfield Symphony Hall before the seats were installed in there at that time. And someday I would actually love to have another On to Victory dance as a fundraiser someday at the Armory. So I thought that would be pretty fun to do. And here they are giving out those WOW bandanas, and they're also in white, and Judy Kane is giving those out. And again, that's the first time those bandanas were given out, and it was quite a morale booster at that time. So who recognizes this band leader? We have Benny Goodman, and this was part of the Victory Parade of Spotlight Bands, and he played at the Armory on September 29th, 1943. It was a little chilly that night outside, and it was held behind the Armory. And to commemorate this, we have a big band play in July each year. We haven't had it the past 2 years due to COVID-19. So hopefully we are planning to do another one next July, which will be nice to again commemorate his band. So toward the end of World War II, the layoffs started. And of course, the women were the ones who went first. Employment would never be as high again as it was during World War II. It was really hard for a lot of the women who were laid off there because they had such a sense of independence financially as well. Working at the Armory, they formed a lot of friendships there. And so again, it was really, really difficult for a lot of those women who did lose their jobs after World War II. So fast forward about 11 years to 1956, when the current chief of staff requested a report from the Army Material Command of the Arsenal System. And the main reason for this request was to find out if private contractors could manufacture firearms more efficiently. And on November 19th, 1964, that decision was announced by Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara that the Springfield Armory was considered excess to the needs of the federal government. And needless to say, the citizens of Springfield were so shocked by this news. A delegation went to Washington, D.C. to plead the case to save the Armory. They had really, really good, they did their homework on the numbers and such. But despite all their efforts, Robert McNamara still stuck to his decision to close the Armory. So this was a time during the Cold War too, and they felt that with the Armory being on the East Coast, it was more susceptible to missiles coming in. So the Army Ordnance Department, the headquarters actually changed to Rock Island Arsenal, which was more in the heartland. It was in Illinois at that time. And so that's where they moved the headquarters when they decided to close the Armory. This picture is always so sad to me. This is on April 30th, 1968. A ceremony was held on the green in front of the Armory, or the main arsenal at that time. You can see the flag coming down there. And the American flag was slowly lowered from atop the clock tower. The last Armory employees left. The forge, the rail sidings, the laboratories, the firing ranges, the storerooms, the officers' quarters, and the administrative offices all went silent that day. And sadly, the end of an era was over. But do not despair, because all was not lost. Although not the same, in 1978, the American flag was raised once again, waving majestically over the Springfield Armory, and the doors reopened as part of the National Park Service as a National Historic Site. And today, you know, its legacy lives on there as a unit within the National Park Service. And now we are currently open from 9:30 to 4 Wednesday through Sunday. And the best part is we are free. And for all of you who are interested in reading more what it was like to be a WOW working at the Armory, I highly recommend reading this book, The Wartime Sisters. It's historical fiction, very light reading about two sisters who find their way to the Springfield Armory and work there in 1942. And I am doing a program on this book using archival photographs. And that's going to be on November 20th at 1 p.m. And that is going to be via Zoom. If you'd like to sign up for that, you can, I have it on our Facebook page and our website. So thank you very much for attending today's program. I appreciate it. And if you have any questions, I'd love to answer those for you.
Susan, can you stop sharing for a moment so that we can get everybody back together? And let's hope that we get some conversation here.
I hope so. Thank you for bearing with me. I always, like I said, I feel like I'm doing the program to myself. I always when where I get feedback from visitors while when I'm talking about it. So if you guys have questions, that is great. I must have bored everybody.
Susan, it seems as if you have a bit more information than other places do. I've been trying to find things like the parade that happened. I know that there was a victory parade in downtown Springfield. There's no photographs that I can locate of that. I can't come up with the list of dead from Springfield that served. I can't come up with a list of the people that served from Springfield. And I can't find any war monuments. Do you know of any of those things?
You know, the parade, we may have that in the Armor newsletters. Every newspaper article too that had anything to do with the Armory, we have it's like when a mom used to cut out the newspaper clippings. We have that. Somebody did that at the Armory, an employee, that was their job. And so we have that. So what you could do is send an email to Alex, our curator. And if you want, I can give you his email address, and then you can make an appointment to do some research there with our archives.
That'd be very helpful. Trying to put
absolutely
more about the influence of Springfield. We've gone through our yearbooks at Classical High School during the war years, and we have compiled a lot of information in the same way that there were clubs at the Armory. There were clubs on the campus of Classical, and we're trying to put together more of that, dealing with the rationing club. There was a group that was wartime savings, and so yes, we'd like to compile more. Thank you.
Right, absolutely. There was, I was amazed at how the dynamics changed once women started at the Armory. I think it put more life into the Armory. The stories are really funny to read about. And again, through those, I had one idea of doing this program, but after reading the Armor newsletter, it's almost like the voices of the employees really helped with the program itself. It was like their voices, which was pretty neat. Does anybody like family, relatives work at the Armory?
Yes.
Nice.
My name is Julie Nolan, Julie Ledoux Nolan. I'm currently living in Glen Ellen, Illinois. Excuse me. Both my dad and my uncle worked in the photo lab at the Armory. They were both there during World War II. They worked with John Durant.
Very nice. Yeah.
So a lot of the photographs you're showing originated there.
I can't even tell you, we have probably easily over 10,000 photos. We have glass negatives. And right now we have a photography exhibit on display that the pictures are just amazing. And again, they give us a look into what life was like at the Springfield Armory, which is fascinating.
In fact, one of the photographs you showed, the golf foursome, when you were talking about clubs, my dad and his friends, that's the people in the picture.
Oh, that's great. That is awesome. Yeah. I always love the employee version. Like I said, we're more than just firearms, and
Right.
a lot of the armory people are just thinking about this particular weapon. But what about the people who were manufacturing this, who was making it, who was putting the trigger blades together? And they used to stick notes in the back where the clean-in was, in the back of the M1. There was like a little flap there. And women used to put notes in there for the soldiers, which I think was adorable.
Yeah, they use black walnut wood for the gun stocks.
Right.
And the wood, they were big. They were about this big and pretty heavy.
Mm-hmm.
The wood that was not usable for the guns, my dad took some of it home, and in our playroom when we were kids, we had a play table. The 4 legs were those 4 walnut blocks of wood.
Yes, the blanks. I can't tell you how many times I heard stories of people saying, they'd have them dumped at their house, like the ones that they were going to use to burn, for heat and such like that. I mean, the stories we hear were just like, wow, I guess things haven't changed, in some areas. So so it's black walnut, and they would put that, whoever's been to the armory itself, in building 19, which is now the Student Activity Center at Stick.
Right.
But the building was very, very long, was a horse stable at one time. And they used to put the black walnut in there to dry for about 2 to 3 years before they would carve it out for the gun stocks. So
and I know this is about classical high school, and I don't mean to cut into, your aspect of it, but I just wanted to share that.
Oh, absolutely.
Susan, I'm sorry, this is Tom Burton. I've got a couple quick anecdotes for you. I agree with Julia. My dad worked at the Armory after the war until the move to Rock Island. He was a machinist, but he would bring home gun stocks as well. And every kid in the neighborhood then had a toy rifle to play soldier with. You would slap a broomstick in the groove, and you were off to the races. But when you mentioned not wanting the employees to leave the grounds for meals, my wife's grandmother lived on Lincoln Street, and she opened her home as a restaurant for the workers. And every morning she'd get up about 4 a.m. and bake 15 pies, we're told, and they'd all be gone by the end of the lunchtime. But
I bet
there were more than one way that women served, other than just working in the plant. And lastly, I did a career in the Navy. I was first of all a Navy hospital corpsman, but we were all issued at one time what was called a corpsman's knife that was made at the Armory, and it looked it looked more like a machete than anything, but it had stamped into the metal blade that symbol of the grenade that you called it.
yes, the ordnance symbol.
Yeah, and then below it were the initials SA for Springfield Armory.
It's funny you bring up a great point, because I was just talking to Alex, our curator, about that. All the things that were made at the Springfield Armory that weren't necessarily firearms, like edged weapons, bridles that go on cannons. They actually made the weather vane on top of building 14. It's no longer there, but we have it in our collection. But they wanted to keep the employees busy because they did not want to lose their skill. And a lot of them, because private industries were paying so much better than the Armory. So the private industries would love to get the Springfield Armory employees, because they would get them all trained really well.
Sure.
And then they're like, oh, we don't have to train them. And then they pay them more. So it was so important for the Armory to have them making other things. So I said to Alex, our curator, that it'd be great if we put a collection together of those other items besides firearms. They also made parachute knives for World War II. We don't even have one of those. You know, they just didn't think about, well, maybe we should keep a couple for a museum or because the museum started as a technical library for the engineers. So they didn't.
Every once in a while, I know those Corman knives, every once in a while you can see them on eBay for sale.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Alex if we have any of those, but thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Susan, one of the things that I've been reading about was the Rosie the Riveters, and I'm sure it was true of the WOWs also, was that not only did they lose their jobs, but many of them became widows. Were there anything that was done for women that had lost their husbands during the war? Were they also laid off along with everybody else? Was there any decisions made to try and retain them?
You know what? That is a great question. And I have not come across any of that. And that's another question I will ask Alex about that as well. So that is a good one. And it's kind of, Zan, in a way that we call sometimes, we have a room upstairs, we call it the room of doom. And it needs to be, none of it's been archived, cataloged, or anything. So there are so many other discoveries waiting in that room. And working at the Armory, every day to me, I am there, it's a new discovery, something we are finding. Somebody walked through the doors that was a kid who grew up on Armory grounds. I love that. So it's every day we're finding out new things, which is fascinating to me.
I just wanted to get a hand count. Are there people I know that Julie said she's from Illinois. Is there anybody else from out of state that's calling in today?
Sarasota, Florida.
I thought so. I wasn't sure, Tom.
Yeah.
You've joined us for other programs, I know.
Yes. I always look forward to them.
Alpharetta, Georgia.
Binghamton, New York.
Wow.
Wonderful.
I used to live in Springfield.
Yeah, I did too. I grew up there.
Well, I'm glad that we've had some outreach to greater community, and that's something that we could never have done if this were a live presentation. So we do appreciate Susan coming today. We have other programs scheduled for this fall that I just want to tell you about. On November 14th, we have Andrew Lamb, and he's going to be speaking on the 442nd Infantry during World War II. He has written a fictional book, but he is a historian, and he will speak about the most decorated per capita group of the Japanese Americans that served in World War II. That should be very interesting. And I'm trying to reach out to Japanese groups in Hawaii and in Boston. So I will spread the emails to you, and hopefully you can disseminate them also to invite more people for our November show. We also have another program called The Greatest Generation that's coming up on Focus TV. That will be on the cable network in Springfield. I don't have the date of that, but it will be probably sometime around the Pearl Harbor Day. I've asked for sometime around December 7th. So those are all programs continuing on with our World War II theme. We also have a virtual tour coming up of our historic classical building. So for those of you that would like to take a tour of the building, that will be coming forward very soon too. So with that, I would like to thank Susan. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. I'd like to thank the Historical Classical Board for joining and supporting our efforts in putting this together. Okay, if there's nothing further, I'd like to say thank you, and until November.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you
Thank
all.
Thank you.
You bet.